Musicians always laugh at that line. I want to read a short little scene from Eli the Good, just because I've always loved this scene, and I had to fight so hard to get it in the book, which happens so often that you know, a lot of times you have to kill your darlings, you have to kill the things you love the most, but sometimes there's a thing you just love so much that you keep fighting for it, and it finally gets to be in the book. And this is one of my favorite scenes. The reason they didn't want it to be in the book is because Eli the Good is all told from the point of view of Eli, who's a 10-year-old boy during the summer of 1976, whose family is falling apart around him. His father's a Vietnam veteran who has PTSD, although they don't know what that is at the time. The family doesn't. And his sister, who's a famous war protester, comes to live with them. So in a way, the Vietnam War is being, the state of the United States is being reenacted within the confines of that house, a veteran of the Vietnam War and a Vietnam War protester. So this sets off a series of events that causes lots of explosive things to happen. So the whole book, Eli is reporting all this. He's eavesdropping and sneaking around and telling you his own story. But I really, really wanted to tell you more about his sister. And in this scene, Eli is not present, but he tells you about it anyway. And so that freaks the editor out. She's like, how's that possible? So the way that I set the story, this passage up, is that Eli, this story's been told you in retrospect. So he's putting together things that Josie has told him, things that her now ex-boyfriend Charles Asher has told her, and he's using his own imagination because he knows his sister so well. So, if I could have flown, I would have slipped out of our living room window, floated down our road with the warm river by its side, and glided above the main highway, over refuges, closed but well-lit businesses, the courthouse steeple's flag that rose and fell as if breathing, out into the darkness of the country, over the high school and the spillway where teenagers went to park, over mountains becoming black with the deepening of night, and then to the drive-in, where the screen stood like an impossibly big and wide tombstone. The face of Gregory Peck loomed large there as he drew back the hair of his son's head and found the mark of the beast. Among the rows of cars, the movie was sold out that night, was a candy apple red 1966 Mustang that belonged to Josie's boyfriend, Charles Asher. Inside the car, Charles Asher was kissing Josie's neck, but she paid him no mind. She ate great handfuls of popcorn and kept her eyes on the movie. She paused from this only long enough to reach down into the floorboard for her Pepsi. She took a long drink. Her lips capped around the straw for a moment after she was finished, and then set it back down without taking her eyes from the screen. Charles Asher, one of those people who is always called by his first and last names for no particular reason, was used to my sister not paying him very much attention. It was common knowledge that she had first gone out with him simply because he drove the sharpest car at the high school. After that initial date, she was taken by how he fawned over her, and then grew to like him, and then dislike him. But ultimately, she felt such a mix of pity and gratitude to him that she was never able to quit him. He told me more than once that he thought he loved her, but he also knew that he'd never capture her heart completely. Gregory Peck's demon child, Damien, was running into a church, and the horrifying music was rising, and Josie couldn't stand it anymore. She had snuck into a showing of The Exorcist when she was only 12, and had been forever scarred by that experience. So horror movies were not her strong suit, although she was scared of nothing else, as far as I know. Josie couldn't stand it and had to look away. Only then was she aware of Charles Asher nibbling on her ear. She pushed him away, glad for this diversion. "Cut it out, Charles Asher," she said. "God almighty, buddy, you're like a dog in heat." "I was just kissing you." Charles Asher straightened himself in his seat, his elbow knocking against the horn so that it let out a brief, half-hearted honk. Josie ran the back of her hand down her neck. "You were slobbering all over me," she said. But then she realized how hateful she was being, and felt a momentary pang of guilt. Later that summer, she told me that it had taken her a long time to understand that the very reason she could never love Charles Asher was because he allowed her to treat him so badly. She could have never respected anyone like that. But that night, she didn't understand why she sometimes detested him, no matter how much he bought her, no matter the long love letters he wrote to her, confessing his undying love. She kept these in a cigar box under her bed, and I had read every one of them while she was out on dates with him. Really, she didn't understand much of anything at all. She was 16 years old. Josie told me everything, even when I was very small, so I already knew that summer she felt there might be something wrong with her. Any other girl at school would have killed for Charles Asher. He was good looking in a J.C. Penney catalog sort of way, his face all angles and jutting bones, so that Josie sometimes had to look for the beauty there. His lips were his best feature, pink as the inside of a shell and plump as a girl's, but his brow was too high set and his eyes too far apart for her. The problem was, he wasn't interested the way Steve McQueen or Paul Newman were. She found beauty in irregularities, in roughness. Charles Asher had none that she could find. He was all perfection and smoothness. He was a good dresser, though, and drove this fine car and knew how to treat a girl, always buying her record albums and roses in little plastic sleeves from the gas station. The problem was, she preferred daisies. I think I love that scene because I love remembering the drive-in, and I'm grieving the loss of my hometown drive-in, which you know, it hung in there a long time. It only closed about 3 or 4 years ago, but I still miss going to the movies at the drive-in. Much easier to sneak your own food in, for one thing. We'll make out time to read a short little thing from my new book. It's called Little Fire. Sorry, just a second. It's called Little Fire, and it's about a preacher who loses his church. He gets voted out by his congregation because he stands up in the pulpit and tells them all that he can no longer reject his brother who has come out to him. And he when his brother comes out to him, he rejects him. And his brother disappears, and he's been gone 10 years. And suddenly the preacher, fundamentalist preacher, realizes that he can no longer live that way, that he doesn't really believe what he's preaching to the church. And so he tells the church this, and they tell him to hit the road. And so he also, in the process, he gets a divorce. His wife leaves him because of this. And he becomes sort of a young woman takes a video of him doing this, and it goes viral, and is seen by 8 million people on YouTube. And so he has some notoriety. That leads to him losing custody. He can't even see his little boy. So at this point, he's kidnapped his little boy, and he has taken his little boy has been staying the night with his grandmother Zelda, who you'll see in this scene. And in the process of kidnapping Justin, the lead character Asher has accidentally knocked his mother-in-law down and harmed her. She's hurt her hip. But he goes ahead and leaves with the little boy, and they're headed to Key West. And in this scene, they're looking for a telephone booth so he can call and check on his ex-mother-in-law. The first gas station had an old blue booth with a bell painted on the side. And this is contemporary times, but he's thrown his cell phone away in the river. The first gas station had an old blue booth with a bell painted on the side, but the payphone had been taken out. Justin hadn't even known such a thing existed, actually. He couldn't even wrap his mind around a time when people didn't have phones in their pockets. The next station didn't have one either. Asher muttered aloud to himself that cell phones had killed all the phone booths. They sailed on down the interstate to the next exit, where there was not one single thing except a huge truck stop painted highway striped yellow with a red sign on its roof that was so big Justin thought it could probably be seen from space, like the Great Wall of China they'd read about in World Seals. Tightwads, the cheapest gas in the South, not guaranteed, the sign announced. A blue phone booth stood right out front where they could pull up close. Southern Belle was written on the side in faded white letters. "I'm going to call you Mama right quick," Asher said, shoving the gear shift up in the park. "You want to talk to her?" Justin didn't think he could stand to talk to her. She'd start crying and would probably tell him to run off, to get to a cop, to find some way to get back to her. Or she'd say, "Just pray, honey, pray and the Lord will see you through this." And Justin knew it didn't work like that. He didn't believe God would even listen to prayers you ask for yourself. He shook his head no, with emphasis. "You sure?" Asher was fishing quarters out of the ashtray. "It'd do her good to hear from you." "I'm positive," Justin said, with some amount of exhaustion. So Asher closed the door and went to the phone. Justin zeroed in on a young Cherokee woman in cut-off jeans and a red halter top who was strutting across the parking lot while she smoked a cigarette. Her breast bounced up and down with each step she took. Justin thought the word titties in his head and laughed to himself. He loved that word. It was his favorite. Her hair was shiny and black, almost to her waist, and she slipped one side of it over her shoulder. The muscles in her brown legs tightened each time she put a foot forward. A trucker swung down out of the cab of his 18-wheeler and whistled at her. "Lord have mercy, honey," he hollered, and she glanced his way, and Justin thought for a minute that she would give him the finger, but then she put her eyes back on the truck stop door. "All right then, squaw woman," the man yelled, and then patted his hand against his mouth to make a woo-woo-woo-woo sound, like the fake-looking Indians in old bad westerns his mama watched on the Late Show. At this, she did flip off the trucker, her eyes conveying her message even more than her extended middle finger. Justin pictured her getting ready this morning, putting on her blue eyeshadow and turning to see if her shorts were short enough, staring at herself in the mirror the whole time, wishing she was somebody else. Justin thought most people wished for this. He thought that she had probably been treated like a dog for most of her life. He thought maybe she never had anyone who came home and kissed her on the forehead and told her she was good. Thoughts like these were what made Justin dangerous to some and wonderful to others. Justin watched her because he didn't want to see Asher when he called back home. He didn't want to see what would happen. Maybe his mother had gotten his voicemail by now and had called Zelda. Maybe Zelda would convince his father to turn around and go back home. Maybe the cops would pull in any minute, guns drawn, sirens turning the sides of the truck stop blue, the Cherokee girl peering out the window to see what kind of excitement she had stumbled upon this time.